On this channel we have extensively looked at the rarest items that are available in the world of Elden Ring. As we've covered quite a lot of items in the past, I wanted to take the opportunity to make this list of items so you can take this list, use it, farm these specific items and flex on your enemies or your friends. So obviously sit back, relax, enjoy this video as I show you my top 5 rarest items that you can get in Elden Ring. Now just to preface this video, it is heavily opinion based, so it is based on my experience obtaining these items and farming them. So obviously if I found it incredibly easy, it's probably going to be towards the bottom of the list, but if it's really hard to obtain, then obviously it's at the top. However, I am also considering the community's input, and also when doing research, just seeing the comments of how hard it was for some people to get these items to drop, but it is heavily opinionated. And in the background, when I'm talking about these items, I'm also going to be showing you on screen the farm and the location, obviously, to obtain them. So that's the main construct of this video, but obviously without wasting too much time, let's jump straight in at number 5. And it's actually none other than the Unaltered Banished Knight Armor. Now if you've played Elden Ring, you've probably taken on hundreds of Banished Knights, and they've always dropped their armor pieces, but they only drop the altered version without the cape, and unfortunately you can't tailor it to have it unaltered to just put the cape on. You do have to farm 2 specific enemies that are residing in the Castle Sol among the Mountain of the Giants, as these 2 Banished Knights are the only ones that can drop the unaltered version. They are residing among the outskirts of the castle, and there's every chance, if you're like me, that you've come to this place hundreds of times and you didn't even know this enemy existed. But luckily for me, I actually obtained this item fairly quickly in about sort of 5 or 6 attempts. But I know that there's widespread comments basically saying how hard it is to obtain this armor piece, so that's why it's still in the top 5. But for me, it does find itself at the bottom of the list because it was the easiest of the bunch to obtain. Like everything else on the list, it does have a 0.5% chance of dropping, so there's every chance you're probably going to be there for half an hour trying to take them on hundreds of times. But hopefully you guys can get it fairly early, because it really is a cool armor piece to have. It's something that I am still rocking on my character to this day. I used to have the Raging Wolf armor because I really love the capes in this game, but this one is just so much cleaner and also beneficial on the stats because it's actually better in game as well. So not only is it really cool with one of the cleanest capes I've ever seen in this game, it is also genuinely really good to have because it actually works as a viable armor piece so you don't get battered in the meantime. So if you haven't already got this item, definitely head over to Castle Sol, use the farming method that's on screen to try and obtain it because it's definitely worth it. But swiftly moving on to number 4 in the list, we've actually got a bit of a caveat because it's technically sort of 2 farms, because another really rare item is just next door to the enemy that we're going to be farming for the main weapon I'm about to talk about, and that's actually going to be the Watchdog's Greatsword as well as the Fire Monk's Flame Blade. Now both enemies that you need to farm are residing in the Tomb of the Giants, or the Hero's Grave of the Giants, again located in the Mountain of the Giants. Now upon entering this hero's grave, just past the site of grace is going to be a massive room where there's going to be some shadow figures, 2 of which being the imps and 1 of which being the watchdog that we would need to farm in order to get the greatsword. But just round the corner and through the corridor that is normally being spewed with flames, there's actually a fire monk residing in the little divot that you go into to avoid said flames, and he is also one of the only fire monks that drops the flame blade that he is currently wielding. So there's a bit of a 2-for-1. The main one that I'm talking about and the one that took me the longest is the Watchdog sword, mainly because the enemy's a lot tougher to take on, and also with him being the shadow form, you do need to lure him into the light in the middle of the room to make him vulnerable and obviously take him out and then rinse and repeat that method. So of the 2, the Watchdog Greatsword is the one that's the hardest for me. It took me a good sort of like hour and a half just because the farming method is a little bit longer, where you have to aggro him, which again takes a couple of seconds for him to sort of like wake up and then lure him into that light and take him down. The whole farming method with running back to the side of the grace can also take about 2 minutes or so, maybe a little bit longer, so it does make for a longer farm. But the Watchdog Greatsword itself is possibly one of the best strength weapons that you can use within the game. And again, with it being a longer farm, whilst you're here, I would say go and take on that fire monk that is hiding round the corner in that little corridor. And in which case, you then have 2 of the rarest weapons in the game rather than just 1. But one weapon that did take a considerable amount of time more than the Watchdog's Greatsword was in fact the Magma Blade. Now again, similar to the Banished armor set that we talked about earlier, there are only 2 enemies that drop this Magma Blade, that I know of at least. I could be wrong, let me know if I am in the comments down below, but there's only 2 enemies that drop this specific weapon, and they're both residing in the Volcano Manor, and you do need to defeat the mini boss here, so then you have access to the Site of Grace, which is the Temple of Igle, as that is going to be the start of our farm. Not only are these weapons incredibly hard to obtain, and there only being 2 enemies that we need to kill, it is also the longest farming method due to the fact that we have to use an elevator in order to get there. But once using that elevator, if we hang a right and head out of that door and round the balcony, there is going to be one of the Magma Blade wielding serpents that we can take on to try and get him to drop it. And then the second one is in front of the elevator. If you go through the larger walkway down again that long corridor, there will be one at the bottom of the stairs waiting for you, again wielding the Magma Blade, and these are the 2 enemies that can drop it. For me personally, again, it took a good sort of 2 hours or so, but again, that was purely most of it waiting for the elevator to go up to where I needed to farm. Taking on these guys is a lot easier than say taking on the Watchdogs, but the weapon itself is incredible. Again, we've covered this specific weapon in more detail, and as per the other items as well, there will be links in the description to go and watch that specific video to see if it's worth it and have a deeper dive into the stats and everything. But for me personally, Magma Blade finds itself sort of smack bang in the middle as to what I would consider to be doing when farming a weapon with a 0.5% drop rate, because it took about the amount of time that you would expect given those stats and given the fact that there's only 2 enemies that drop it, so that's why it finds itself smack bang in the middle. Now, just obviously slightly above the Magma Blade at number 2, again, is actually another caveat. It's going to be a triple of weapons that you can obtain because they're all sort of part of the same farm. So much like the Watchdog Greatsword and the Fire Monk's Flame Blade, these next items are all located in the same area, and I like to call them the Bubble Trio. It is in fact the Longhorns and the Great Horns that you can get from the envoys, more specifically residing on the canopy on the Halig Tree. Now, you do obviously need to gain access to the Halig Tree, and typically when you do get to this area, it's pretty much a dash to the next Site of Grace, because there's about 50 different envoys ready to hit you with their bubbles, as well as some ants just to mix in, because why not? So there's every chance you probably didn't even kill anything here, or if you did, you probably defeated them, carried on running, and never looked back to see if they dropped anything. Well, fun fact is they drop one of the rarest items and possibly one of the most unique items in the game. You've got the Envoy's Horn, the Longhorn, and the one that we're more specifically talking about because it's the rarest is the Great Horn. From the Site of Grace, you'll come against all of the enemies, but the one specifically we're worrying about is obviously the biggest and the baddest envoy. He's actually located at the very tip top of the tree, and it is a bit of a journey to get to him. It takes a good minute or so to reach him, obviously take him down, and rinse and repeat that method. Just where it is a little bit longer of a journey, again similar to the Magma Blade, it can take some time with getting this specific Great Horn. I guess the nice thing about this one compared to the Magma Blade is you can farm the other envoys and grab their weapons as well, because they're equally quite rare, just not as rare as the Great Horn that the biggest envoy is holding. And for me, it took an absolute age to get him to drop it. I don't know what it was specifically about this enemy, but he was just very, very stubborn and didn't want to drop it. The amount of times that I thought he had dropped it, but it turned out to be just like the white flesh, it got a bit annoying. But when you did eventually get it, it was quite cool to have that weapon in your arsenal to just pull out and blast your enemies with bubbles. The unfortunate thing is it's not quite as powerful as you would like, but it is still quite cool and can also take people out at range. So if you don't want to use a bow and arrow and you want to be a bit more extra about it, you can use this weapon instead. It of course gets a tremendous amount of style points, so if there is something that you want to flex on your mates, this is definitely the weapon to get. So yeah, good luck if you do choose to do this, because it can take quite a while, or at least it did for me, but with perseverance you should get it in a good couple of hours at the very most. But at the number 1 spot, the most annoying farm that I had to endure was again a caveat of 3 weapons. Mate, I'm just giving away rare weapons. I think there's actually now 10 in a top 5, so you're welcome. Okay, this is the content that you subscribed for, so make sure you hit that subscribe button, alright? But anyway, the weapons in question are actually the most recent weapons that we've discovered in the series, and that is the Celebrant's weapons. More specifically, the Rib Rake. Now, if you ever head over to the Altus Plateau, you've probably made your way to the Windmill Village, where the Godskin boss is residing to get the Godskin Peeler, which is a well-known early game or mid-game really overpowered weapon. But the celebrants that you walk past because they're dancing and obviously cause no problem at all for you are actually holding one of the rarest and most unique weapons in the game. Again, there's 3 of them. You've got the sickle, the cleaver, and as I mentioned before, the Rib Rake, because although there is a large bunch of these enemies that are residing in this area, the ones in the yellow capes are the ones that drop the Rib Rake, which is like the spear type weapon, and the ones in the blue are the ones that drop the sickle, so 2 of each that can potentially drop it, again at a 0.5% drop rate. Just to put this into context, I got the sickle almost straight away, and in the time that it took me to get 1 Rib Rake, I managed to pick up 3 sickles and 6 cleavers. Yeah, okay, the cleavers drop from about twice as many enemies in the area, so obviously double the chance, but the Rib Rake and the sickle have the same amount of enemies with the same drop rates, and it took me 3 times as long, probably longer actually, because I got the 3 sickles and then I had to kill them more times on top of that. I also got a few comments, and I've seen on the community side of things that this Rib Rake is the hardest one to obtain out of the bunch. I don't know why that is, but it just seems to be a common thing where the Rib Rake is the one that's the hardest to get out of the 3. For me personally, it took me about 3 or 4 hours to get this. The Rib Rake finally was obtained, but yeah, it was a bit stressful. So yeah, that is pretty much my rarest items, or like my hardest to farm items in Elden Ring. Hopefully I've been able to show you guys some items you maybe haven't heard of or seen before, and now you know where to get them and how to get them. Each item that we've discussed so far I have covered in more depth, so if you want a more detailed sort of description and like a gameplay of each weapon, do check the description down below, because I am going to put links to the individual videos discussing each item in the list. And as I said earlier, we're still continuing on with the series. I'm still looking at rare items that are available in Elden Ring, and I'm still discovering new things that I've never seen before. There are of course more items that weren't on this list that are also within that series, so make sure you check them out. If you like those videos as well as this one, do hit the like button down below. It supports the channel so much and it means more than you can imagine. And again, as I said earlier, if you want to stay up to date for the future rare items and just future content in general, do hit that subscribe button, and that way you will be notified whenever a new video is released. But realistically, that is everything from me, guys. Hopefully you have enjoyed this episode. It's been a while since we made a top 5, so let me know if you want to see any more videos like this. But yeah, for now, I'll leave you guys to it. Hopefully you have an amazing rest of your day, guys, and I will catch you in the next episode of whatever it is that we make. Bye bye.